G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic Friday leading into an even better weekend. Now tonight I'm actually going out for dinner with my parents to celebrate hitting 200,000 subscribers on YouTube. Now I'm not a massive one for numbers, but I'd just like to take a moment to thank each and every one of you. We have been on one hell of a ride. But today, legends, of course, we have a lot to go over. Of course, we'll look at the maps. I have a lot of geolocations to show you and some important pieces to add there. Ukraine overnight has carried out large drone strikes again against Russian oil facilities. Now, I'm not surprised by this, and the time doesn't surprise me either. We'll continue to see this, and these will increase around the time of Trump entering the White House. But one of the things we'll add on when we're looking at the maps is Russia is preparing the battlefield. For the last months, I've been saying once we see this specific weapon come into play, this is used to shape the battlefield, and then we will see further infantry and armoured movements on areas. And today we have seen that weapon brought into play because there are some specifics around this that make it very difficult. Of course, we'll be looking over new drones that have entered the battlefield and some strikes and that sort of miscellaneous folder we have. And we need to talk about President Zelensky, informational war, and how he's done a complete 180 turn on his messaging. And the messaging has changed from Russia is defeated, they're useless, they are incompetent, to an idea that Russia will easily sweep through Europe and NATO. And I'll quote Zelensky from Polish media. Without the Ukrainian army, Europe unfortunately has no chance against Russia today. Putin knows this, and he talks about it in his circle. Now, you know me. What I'll say, and I've spoken on things like this does not stand up to any critical thinking, or it doesn't stand up even if you put on your pro-Ukraine hat or your pro-Russian hat and go on either side of this fence and look in. It then falls over completely from those aspects as well as a critical, nuanced aspects in the middle. But there's more at play here, and we're going to go over informational war, propaganda, messaging, and of course when you have then international support. So we'll go over all of that. But I want to say this right in the start for those who won't stick around for that at the end. Russia does not pose a conventional military threat to NATO. If Russia launched a war into NATO and Article 5 was enacted, they would get Lily Phillips from all sides. Russia's best bet in a war like this, or if they wanted to do that, would be to scare the world through escalation, through de-escalation with a nuclear weapon as a tool of coercion. But if that bluff is called, well, Moscow then will be flattened. And I don't think that is in anyone's case, because that is why we have the mutually assured doctrine, the MAD treaty. We know that if that happens, very likely it's all over from there. And I don't think anyone wants to run that risk. Does Russia pose a threat to the West? Yes. The threat that Russia poses to the West is ideologically. It's the same threat that the Soviet Union posed to the West. And Russia is positioning themselves as the, quote, poster boy for traditional values. Religiosity, nuclear families, all of this, that traditional, and people more like conservative. I don't really like the word conservative, progressive. I'd like to, if we're going to put traditionalist and put postmodernist, I think that sums it up better, but I don't like putting anyone in a box either, because I've got some views that are probably way one way and way the other way. But we talk about that they're putting themselves as this poster boy for traditional values. We see this through things like President Putin's decrees that he puts out. Do you know how to fight this? Do you know how to defeat this if you are a European leader? Maybe then look inwardly and ask yourself, why would people maybe attracted to this? And why are so many people swinging right being disgusted by some of the current ideologies that are being enforced on people in the West? And if you do that, you know what will happen? Well, you'll have niche little pockets of extremes, but you will defeat any aspect of that ideological threat. Now, with this, the conventional military threat, ideological threat, Zelensky's a smart guy. Zelensky knows this. And we will go over this aspect of anti-Russian messaging and this existential war idea into Europe and how this can be effective, of course, when Ukraine is completely reliant on foreign aid coming in. But what we're going to look at today also is how messaging like this is increasing, of course, and this increases in line with frontline setbacks for Ukraine. So we're going to go over all of that. Sorry for the long-winded introduction on a Friday. Go get a beer because we've got about 20 minutes left. So, of course, we'll start with these oil strikes. Again, for days in a row now, Ukraine has conducted both successful and some intercepted drone strikes on oil. With any strikes, whether it be into Kiev, whether it be into areas in Russia, whether it's into Moscow, it is always impossible to know because we know that there is large censorship around then reporting on these strikes. But we see this from Mr. Noel reports. The Ukrainian General Staff confirmed the strikes at the oil depot in Lysky, and we've seen multiple of these. Again, we wait for satellite imagery to confirm how much damage actually was done there. But what is Ukraine trying to do? They're trying to paint, of course, to Mr. Donald Trump that then they can affect further into Russia and the oil and gas prices, but also try and undercut the Russian economy, which is funding the war through elements like this. But it is not solely that. If you want to know more about the economy, first link in the description with a professional in Eastern European economics. So we speak a lot about fiber optic controlled drones, and I bet you are sick of it. But I wanted to show you this. Now, there's this idea amongst people that have probably never served a day in their life, well, I think they'd have to have served a day in life, that you could somehow just like follow along back down this fiber optic cable like you're a cave diver down a bloody chasm and find where the drone operators are. Now, where do these cables go across? Fortified position. So you might be able to do it in theory, but it might not end well in practice. But I just wanted to show you this because this is not something I've seen. He said, I wish you all health. This is from this guy's call sign of Flash. This is what it looks like when fiber optic cables, he's holding them here. So let's just turn this down in this direction. This is fiber optic, and it's very interesting to actually see these. This is not something I'd seen before, and you can see that there are multiple of these, and he's basically saying that in Kursk and in other areas there's a lot of them. They're basically covering the fields on all fronts. He's saying it is very difficult to move around and not find the fiber optic, so these are being used everywhere. And what we have seen is a sharp increase in Russia's use of fiber optic controlled drones over then your radio-controlled drones. Now, in my opinion, it's still a smaller percentage that are fiber optically controlled. Let's say it's 10%. But in also my opinion, and seeing all this, I think 80% of successful hits I'm seeing at the moment are from fiber optics. So the rate of kill on them is significantly higher, which would fall in line with the counters at the moment is shotgun, not great, or electronic warfare. And people talk about that EOS system that went in, and I said at the time, I copped a lot of criticism, that this Bushmaster cannon on here, I have some friends that have told me on testing it wasn't fantastic, although everyone online was saying the Stringer, I think it's called, is going to be game-changing everyone's titles and fucking woohoo! What has it done? Not fucking that much. Again, there's no such thing as a wonder weapon, except ones that go across the fucking sky and level cities, but it's a wonder weapon for your own city as well. Anyway, let's talk about a new Russian drone that's come into play. I've heard some rumours among some pages about this, but now I've seen some footage, and we have this photograph here. Now, all we need to see is these two smaller drones here and controlled by a larger one here to designate targets. We talk about guided systems and laser designated systems too. Of course, this gets around jamming of GPS and or GLONASS. Some can use a mixture of both. If you know what GLONASS is, it's basically the Russian version of GPS with their satellites up floating around space. Now, the first confirmed use of a new version of Russian kamikaze, the Cub-2, with an optical electronic guidance system. Now, the Cub-2 has been in service, although it's very rare to see. Now, if it's rare to see, there's two things we can draw from that. Either there's not that many of them, or a lot of them are being intercepted, but with optical electric guidance systems. Now, I don't know fully on this, but what it sounds like to me is similar to like how a javelin works, that it targets off optics, not off lasers, because you have certain systems that can pick up something being lased. Tanks can do this, can pick up if it's being lased and then tell you where that target is. But just taking a photograph, no, that's what the head of a JAV does. Do some Googling if you want to know more. The target of the Ukrainian 155 self-propelled Bogdana, so this is an SPG, self-propelled gun, in the Pokrovsk direction, and the drone's work was carried out in tandem with a Granat 4 UAV. So these are in tandem with a larger UAV, designate the target, then go in. The early version of the Cub, which did not gain fame, was guided by pre-entered coordinates, which gave a certain error in the accuracy of hitting the intended target, not to mention the use of mobile enemy units in combination with a weak warhead. The effectiveness of the drone could be called mediocre, so probably less than that. But of course, it's pre-entered of this location. It just moves, not being hit. This is one thing we did talk about, and I had a PhD of electronics on the podcast to talk about this, is we saw that huge increase in scanners being more effective, and we did talk about, could Russia have retrofitted those to be more laser designated or even optically, what do they call it, optical electric guidance system? Could we do that? And he actually went over some then YouTube videos people saw breaking down Iskanders that had fallen in the territory of Ukraine and showing it. And I will try and link, if I remember that, below, because he says, yeah, it probably could be retrofitted on here, because we did see a sharp increase in the use of those. But I think it's probably more of a policy than a hardware thing for that. But thus, in addition to various FPV drones, the Lancet, our army now has a new kamikaze drone, which, judging by the published data, has formed in tandem with a Zala working with the Lancets, so similar for these loitering munitions, and reconnaissance with the Granat 4 with the Cub. So we are seeing more of these loitering munitions, and we see this here. It's not the greatest footage in the world, but what we can see is this is then the larger drone then working in tandem with the smaller one. You can see it just up in here where there has been a strike, and we have the footage furthermore here. Oh, I need to. That is definitely copyrighted music. There is Lady Gaga music on the backing of this. Fair enough. Typically, AC/DC is Australia's biggest contribution to war efforts. Well, actually, electronic countermeasure is as well. But you can see this strike here as well. So one, then looking at the target, transmitting the data and across. And those data links, the shorter you've got that link, the harder, of course, it is to jam. That's why GPS GLONASS going all the way up and all the way back down on the flat Earth that we rotate around the bloody sun on. I don't know how the flat earthers think, but that's why those are so deadly. Now, I spoke about that Russia is shaping the battlefield, so let's show you that now. Of course, in the center of your screen, we have Ukraine and the capital of Kiev. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2022. I just spat. I was too distracted by that. Now we want to come down into Velika Novosilka. Of course, a very important area. We know Russia has been pushing on here. What has Russia done here? Well, now they have turned back all of the Ukrainian 2023 counter-offensive gains in this area, from Staromorski all the way up through Velika Novosilka. That is a very important piece to take into account, especially when we're talking psychological warfare and then morale shortages too. So we can see that through Vreminka up into Velika Novosilka as well. Now, what am I talking about of shaping the battlefield? So Russia's Vostok group has been using TOS in Velika Novosilka, of course, a thermobaric weapon. And we see this here. This is released from Russian pages. This is a multiple launch rocket system with thermobaric warheads. We can see these landing in here. Now, we'll talk about some of the restrictions on this weapon system as well. And what we see, and what I'm getting out of shaping the battlefield, is Russia has this like paint by numbers of offensive techniques at the moment. What it is, hitting with fabs. While hitting with fabs onto an area, then getting the flanks and securing the flanks. And then using thermobarics, as they are extremely effective against fortified positions right before we see Russia move in. We saw this exact thing with the start of Chasiv Yar. We saw this exact thing with Wugledar as well. And when we're seeing that, I think very soon we'll see further storming. And today we are really seeing this. Now, let's talk about TOS1. Now, of course, what we know is one of the big restrictions for Russia on TOS is just the range of it. The range now, there are multiple variants of this, but the upper variants with the 20 kilometer claimed 15, 25 kilometer range, we just don't see much. We see the TOS1, which is under 10 kilometers, and we've talked again and again that Ukraine needs to keep these weapon systems out of range of these areas, and I have spoken about these further advances towards Pokrovsk is at real threat of these. Yes, 6Ks back to here, 10Ks back to here, so maybe at this point in time, because they're highly susceptible to drones, Russia don't want to bring them in, but once we see them there, I will talk further about shaping that as well. But thermobaric weapons like the TOS1 are so devastating because they use fuel air explosive technology to create a massive blast wave, intense heat, making them highly destructive against personal structures and fortifications. So demolish everything with your fabs and then everything underground with these. The mechanism, they release a fine cloud of fuel particles or gas, which then mixes with oxygen in the air before being detonated. But this gas can go down into fortifications and areas as well. These are a completely savage weapon system. Now, are these against then conventions? No. Are people calling for them to be? People have been calling for that, but with thermobarics, we don't ban things that the US tends to use. This results in an explosion much larger and longer lasting than conventional explosives of the same weight. And you can see much of the footage of that too. Much longer explosive, more than burning up. People call them the heavy flamethrower blast wave. The explosion produces an intense and prolonged blast wave that penetrates buildings, bunkers, caves, killing or injuring people within these through overpressure. Overpressure is something that is not spoken about, that is incredibly dangerous on the front line. Heat. The weapon creates extreme heat, incinerating objects and causing catastrophic damage to structures. Now, along with this blast wave, we have vacuum effect. That's blast one way and the other way as well, because that gas goes out and then ignites, and the rapid consumption of oxygen then creates that vacuum effect, which can suffocate survivors, probably in a best case scenario, because this can literally turn you inside out. Thermobarics have been used a hell of a lot in thermobaric grenades through other areas throughout the world as well, because a lot of structures are very strong this way. Like if you've got a house and your roof's here, this way, not exactly that way. That vacuum can just collapse the building in. It was used a lot in mud buildings in certain areas of operation around the world. This combination of pressure, heat, oxygen deprivation makes thermobaric weapons particularly lethal and effective against dug-in infantry in urban areas and soft targets. Absolutely it does. The biggest problem for Russia is actually just getting these into the fight, because we've seen a lot of them struck. We don't know about the industrial capacity to make more of these, but you've got to be within that range, and of course your range of it is basically the same range as drones operating as well, and this is a very bloody high priority target to take out. Let's talk about Velika Novosibirsk. Now, we see on Syriak's first update a movement down this road through Vreminka, and then on his second update, then confirming basically very, very similar to what Deep State is saying. Yes, more through this paddock on the south, but again, basically showing very, very similar, saying they're reaching the first houses from this side. Ukrainian forces are beginning to withdraw, and you can just see, you don't need to be a military expert to see, this road is in grey zone, if not cut. These two are cut. Moving in further on here, using the Nokryali River as a point of a natural leverage too. This is becoming a very, very dangerous area. So we will keep an eye on this. Now, we need to move further along to then, I want to actually go to Chasiv Yar while thermobarics are in your head. Now, we just see a tiny little bit of change in Chasiv Yar on this map today, but let's have a look at this. So we see in Chasiv Yar today as well from Russian pages, they are further showing that TOS, thermobaric weapons, are being used, multiple launch strikes. You can see the heat on this and how much longer they explode than a typical munition that's over in a second here against Chasiv Yar. So what I'm saying in this is all preparing the battlefield for further pushes in areas around Chasiv Yar. I don't have that one geolocated. I'd say it's out in here because these are areas or up in here because these are areas not occupied. But what we have said is that before these major areas, the border needs to stay far enough back that they can't be brought into the fold. So if it's over 10 Ks, bringing these into the fold is is impossible unless you're using the very rare, more high-end TOS 2 or 3 system. So let's just zoom out a little bit. You can see the red on this map. The red check is ground that Russia has made over the past 24 hours. And we see through January right here that deep state is showing that Russia has occupied a further 165.7 kilometre squares. Now, this is not surprising to me to see things slow down in January or February. I should have had a little wager with Mr. History Legends about this. But from talking about the Russian winter from Nicholas I, he says Russia has two generals in whom she can confide. Generals January and February. And I won't be surprised if we see further destruction on the front line, because a more stagnant line means TOS, means weapons like FABs are going to work more effectively, but we don't see the kilometre square change. If Trump can't end the war, I don't think that he'll be able to in the times he has given. I think in March we'll see even further gains. So let's look at some geolocated footage. We come down Kurakhove, and what you can see here is further Russian advancement somewhere in the vicinity of maybe 1.7 kilometers, around a mile into Dashny here, as this pocket is then getting enveloped. But I want to look at one very important geolocation in here and talk about something that may be one of the tactics here. And if anyone has some information on this, please let me know. So we have this geolocation right in here, and it won't let me zoom in. I think if I reopen it, I can. Yep, magic, look at that. At this Konstantinopil right in here, we see a FAB 500, actually multiple FAB 500s. Now note how accurate these are for a glide munition on this bridge, crossing into Ulaki, then further into Dashny in this pocket. You might be asking, why hasn't this been taken out? Wait a second. So this is from the wrong side, of course, a Russian page here, this bridge here. So I'm taking their geolocation on this. We see the first one just overshoot, second one basically bang on, and a hell of a lot. And is that second one right here? We see, sorry, I thought we might have seen a third one that I missed last time. Yes, third one right there. Sorry, my bad, skipping through the footage. And a lot of damage to the bridge. Bridges are not meant to come down. They are incredibly hard to actually take out, but a lot of bloody damage to this bridge makes it very difficult to pass. You may pass in a vehicle, like a light vehicle, you may not pass in a tank. But people saying, well, why hasn't this been taken down? Now, one, there has been talk and fighter bomber around targeting and the amount of targets getting pushed and pushed and pushed as other ones come up, and some of these that are big targets but not as critical, as time critical as other ones, get pushed to the bottom. But there's another piece I want to talk of here. So this guy says, I'm surprised that wasn't blown up months ago. I said, I feel the same. Although, if Ukraine was continuing to push soldiers in and Russian commanders believed they were in more advantageous positions, it could make sense to leave this open. Now, this is pure speculation, but similar claims are made by both Ukraine and Russia to create a kill zone by leaving areas open. So what I'm getting at is, if Russia think, well, around in here to the south of Kurakhove, we are taking up those large fortified positions that Ukraine has built and they came under control, and around Dashny here that we are in advantageous positions, and Ukraine is pushing in a lot of reinforcements and soldiers down these roads into here, and we believe we're creating a kill zone in this pocket, then why would you cut that off? That is just a theory of what may be happening here. But again, that is just speculation. Let me know what you think. Now, let's have a look at some of Syriac's maps in here. And as you can see, large increases here, showing that this area around here, this spoil and the dam, is coming under Russian control. Then around these areas, around the treatment plant as well, to the south in Sukryali, and of course Petropavlivka, all the way out Shevchenko, coming up on Andriivka as well. We showed you some footage the other day regarding some of the fortifications here also, and Slovyanka as well, we can see on this map moving. So we do know there was definitely movement in this area. How much? Well, somewhere in between these two maps. And as well, Syriac showing Slovyanka movement and movement towards Dashny as well. I won't be surprised to see this whole pocket close up at some point in time. But we do know that Ukraine is notorious for hanging in positions for way too long. And what was claimed to be a kill zone one way becomes a kill zone another way. Now, what we have seen is that Slovyanka has been occupied, Yasnove here has been occupied, and as well as Pishani up here has been occupied as well. So 3 places came under occupation today, pushing up on Pokrovsk. Further, you can see this expansion of the flank around Pokrovsk. Now, it goes back to, we're seeing a lot of FABs, a lot of drones in here. When and if we see TOS brought into here, that will give us a better idea before when we see further pushes into here. So let's talk about Pokrovsk and have a look at what then Syriac map is showing. So he's showing that Russia has increased their control around Pishani and around this road from Kotline as well. Here, captured the southern part of Kotline, shown by basically both these maps. Yes, we could nitpick on it, but as far as just movement, yes, very similar. And then he's showing this movement being shown down here on Yasnove as well. So we can confirm that movement. That's what we'd like, is multiple different maps showing similar axes at least, or as far similar as possible, gives us an idea. Now we come up in Kharkiv. We have not seen much change in here for a while. Of course, this is Vovchansk. This is an area Russia had sort of its own Kursk 1.0 before Kursk became Kursk. Well, it's actually Kursk 2.0, but we know how that went back in the day. So we see here that this is this Tiki area here that Russian army re-entered the locality of Tiki for the first time since June 2024. This map still showing this as green. Wait out and see if we get any geolocations or other maps then further confirming this. So I want to talk about this article with Mr. President Zelensky and go over some pieces in this. So let's start here. Why could we see, or if we see a rapid increase or a sudden increase, as this says, in then propaganda during protracted attritional war, what could this mean and what dynamics are at play? Right, so it could be morale management, attempting to bolster your own population's morale, but also bolster the population supporting you. In Ukraine's case, this is NATO and the EU. If you can make it that this is an existential threat for you too, then the support will then increase. This goes in line with what Zelensky is saying, that Germany and France are at risk if Ukraine, that Russia will walk across them if Ukraine can't. Now, what I say is it doesn't stand up to critical thinking, because if Germany's not going, or Poland's not going to hold up to Russia, Ukraine, I'm sorry, does not have a chance. Military morale. It could also be aimed at sustaining the morale of their armed forces. Perception of weakness and increased focus on propaganda might signal this side is experiencing setbacks or vulnerabilities. Heightened messaging could be a compensatory measure to mask losses, challenges, or declining capacity. And this is what I showed you recently. We've had more and more censorship coming as well. Everything from the maps to even comments, shaping international opinion. They may be trying to counteract narratives from their opponent or secure more international support, or counteract just some of the realists reporting on this, going, shit's not looking good. This could also be in response to sanctions, diplomatic isolation, or waning support from allies. I think this is number one of what we are seeing in this, and this goes into these so-called narratives in the first dot point here. Preemptive justification might surge in preparation for a significant action, escalation, retreat, or controversial tactics could be aimed to frame such action as justified or necessary. I think we are getting we have been in the danger zone, so to speak, Mr. Goose and Maverick, the danger zone for a false flag attack in Ukraine, in Europe, somewhere for a long time now. And I think this is just increasing that risk to what I would say is more likely than not to have escalation here or bring in others at this point in time. I think it is highly likely. That was in my predictions for this year. Shifts in strategy. A pivot to heavy propaganda could reflect a broader strategic shift where psychological operations are becoming a central aspect of their war effort. This might happen if direct military victories are proving elusive, and this is exactly what I said in the front. As the frontline actions tend to get worse, we see an increase in propaganda. We saw this at the end of 2022 with Russia as well. Escalation or desperation. If propaganda becomes markedly extreme or apocalyptic or existential, it could suggest desperation. This might be a final push to rally all resources to intimidate opponents into negotiations, or further to bolster support from allies. Resource allocation. Propaganda campaigns may indicate that resources are being funneled into informational warfare. This suggesting either confidence or ineffectiveness or lack of capacity to escalate through other means of military hardware of troops. And I think if you see this, that you would see a lot of this is in line with what we are seeing on the battlefield at the moment. So this is a breakdown of what was said by Zelensky. This was by United 24, which is from Zelensky's presidential office. It's a media outlet by that office. And this is a quick summary. This is the TLDR, and then we'll go into what was actually said, and I've got a lot more notes on that. Zelensky expressed his firm belief that European Union militaries will stand little chance against Russian forces without Ukraine's army in an interview with these Polish media outlets, saying Europe without the Ukrainian army will not cope with the Russian army because it is larger in terms of numbers. Russia has more weapons, more people, and is more cruel than the Europeans. This is what it's either Churchill or Kissinger, I can't remember, has said, that Russia has European discipline with Asian tyranny, talking about why it's effective at war and also the population's ability to absorb large losses as well. The Ukrainian president added that of the way they fight compared to other areas, and the ability to sustain both politically larger losses as well. Ukrainian president added, Europe is a different civilization, stressing that Europeans live in democracy and do not know what war is, except Europeans know exactly what war is from the 80s, but from the 40s, 80 years ago. But as far as current warfare, no, very, very few people know what war is. And this is one of the big things I have brought up about Westerners, is in a protracted attritional war, because we live with such a silver spoon in our mouth as the West. If you are a Westerner, I'm sorry, regardless of your income or whatever, you have hit the jackpot anyway. Buddy, count your lucky stars. The odds of you being born somewhere else are much higher. But because of that, the ability to cope with the power going out and food not on the shelves may be lower. I've spoken about this a lot, potentially an attritional battle with China. But Russia knows and has experience in this matter. And without the Ukraine army, Europe unfortunately has no chance against Russia today. Putin knows this and talks about it in his circle. Therefore, Ukraine does not defend itself. He will quickly move on. So saying that they will just move on in through Europe, and this, what I'm saying is this just doesn't stand up. If Europe, NATO, unfortunately has no chance against Russia and Article 5 being enacted, sorry, but then if that is true, one, Russia must be hiding a fucking 5 million man army somewhere and have 500 Su-57s. And if that is true, Ukraine won't stand a chance at this point. Then if it's true, why is Russia struggling around that 19.7 to 20% occupation mark? Let's continue. Zelensky stressed the need for Europe to take a more pragmatic stance by tripling weapons production to both support Ukraine and strengthen its own defences, ensuring it outpaces Russia in the ongoing arms race. So this is what we see. Is you put in, we spoke about this in that increased information, and you put in, no, this is existential for you as well. You need to triple your arms and give it to us. However, he warned that many European countries fail to acknowledge the reality that Russia could expand its aggression. But isn't Russia on the verge of collapse? Wasn't it strategically defeated? Didn't they only have missiles for one more attack? He says this is the biggest mistake, stressing that great awareness would lead to stronger sanctions, increased weapon production, and maximum support for Ukraine. Russia's ambitions extend beyond Ukraine. Zelensky interested, despite reassurances from some European politicians, that Putin would not attack nations like Germany or France. Yes, Russia will not attack nations like Germany or France or Poland or anyone that falls under that banner. Now, firstly, Russia has not shown, the Kremlin has not shown, at least from Putin or Lavrov, they've not shown that they want to do this, nor have they shown that they have the capability to do this. They haven't shown intent or the capability. They are at gaining, a few hundred square kilometres in Ukraine per month, and you're saying that then Germany and France are then next. Zelensky knows this. Otherwise, why would he not want to be in NATO? So that doesn't stand up too. If Germany and France and Europe won't have a chance, why then would you want to join that alliance? Because by joining that alliance, you know then that Russia won't attack it. This is why, Mr. Zelensky, you are so adamant to get into NATO, is because you know Russia won't attack that. See, this doesn't stand up to critical thinking. This is why it is in that informational space. And Thomas says here, Russia is somehow simultaneously the worst army in Europe and then the biggest threat to NATO and all of Europe, to make it make sense. Exactly. And I think the EU will be fine against, being sarcastic here, against the second best army in Ukraine. So this is where this just doesn't add up. But I think the majority of people are seeing through this. And I think at the moment it is having a big effect on how people are viewing Ukraine and Kyiv, the administration there, as a whole. Ukraine's fighting a group in the east, and the Russians are not in such a good position if they've started to drag other countries in the war, for example, North Korea. So saying they're not in a good position in Kursk if they've had to drag other countries in. Again, I think this was likely on North Koreans' request because North Korea has no recent conventional military experience. This is a way to go and gain experience on weapon systems, maybe even and warfare, maybe even in like, hey, we'll give you these shells if our guys can come and get experience and then let that proliferate through North Korea, because we know North Korea will one day want to have the great reunification war with South Korea. How that will go, well, we don't know. But again, here, I don't see this. What I could see is Ukraine wanting to drag other countries in as well, potentially in false flags. I really think that is a real threat at the moment. And again, for a 1 million man strong army, or close enough to for the Russians, North Korea may be around 9,000 to 11,000 troops, who apparently 4,000 or more had been killed already. It's not going to be a so-called game changer. And if the intelligence services in the world confirm to you that Russia has lost 30 to 35,000 people in Kursk, imagine that you are ready to sacrifice the lives of 30 to 35,000 citizens simply to try and influence us without success. Yes, because Russia is the only one that took losses in Kursk for political gain and influence. There was a moment in this war where we expected that American consent to use long-range missiles would be a turning point. Yes, that was put as a game changer. Isn't it the case that these hopes turned out to be false? People always want a miracle, they wait for a miracle and think that launching the possibility of using long-range weapon systems will immediately bring such a miracle. But we knew there was no such thing as a wonder weapon. We said this with the F-16s, we said this with Abrams, but again and again, people are making t-shirts with it on it and Crimean beach parties. What Ukraine needs is, it needs the weapons in just massive numbers. The guys I talk to go, we don't care about an F-16, we don't care about an Abrams, we'd rather have 10 T-72 tanks, our mechanics know how to use them, we don't have to train drivers, or we'd rather have NVG everywhere and everyone with a good pair of boots and everyone with decent body armour and everyone trained. Anyway, that just numerical numbers have a quality of their own. Quantity is a quality. But the fact is that the range of these weapons is not far enough. So saying we need further weapons here to destroy then a list of targets. We need a sufficient number of weapons with appropriate range to strike targets throughout Russia too, that it's not then enough. What should happen before we start negotiations? Ukraine should receive security guarantees. Sorry, this is Zelensky talking here. This is number one. So you're saying we need security guarantees. Everyone has already understood that Russia is an enemy and that it can attack any European country. They have a lot of strength for this, and unfortunately, this is their desire. Putin must be prevented from doing this. If Russia has the strength to do this, Ukraine will not stop them. And if Russia has the strength to do this, why would they come to the table of negotiations? Why would they bother with that? If they've got the strength to walk through Europe and through the EU and through NATO, why then would they even bother putting out any sort of deals at all to have a ceasefire, to have anything other than the full territory of Ukraine come under their control? I always ask what security guarantees, because we can't talk about a ceasefire in this way. We can simply allow the Russians to simply prepare for another aggression, as we saw the first in 14 and the second in 22. Therefore, it's very important what guarantees there will be for Ukraine, where NATO will be, where our weapons will be, and what our financial support will be. So saying we need what our guarantees are, what weapons are you going to give us, and what financial support are you then going to give us before there is any then ceasefire. That said, I don't have confidence that Trump, with a business mindset, is not going to look at the map and going, yep, it's moving by this much. Right, we need to make a concession here of this, and whoever has the most cards on the table, that's going to be cut up like that. If Trump wants to end the war, that's how it has to happen. If Zelensky's right and Putin has the power to walk through Europe, well, it's probably better it stops sooner rather than later. When I talked to Donald Tusk, so from Poland, I said, let's assume that we start the diplomacy when we have an army of almost 1 million in Ukraine and partners now supporting it. And where will we find so many resources, so many weapons to maintain this army if we don't have NATO? There's no support, no air defense, and no fleet, and then we can only count on ourselves. So saying if we need a 1 million man army and we're not in NATO, we have to count on ourselves. Where is the support then coming from? I think there's a second problem with this. If the war ends in a ceasefire, martial law is lifted, those borders then reopen and Ukraine is not in NATO, I believe you will see a huge exodus of those men then leaving. We do know that border patrols find dozens of men trying to leave daily, then illegally against martial law, 18 to 60 cannot leave. And we know what it means to count on ourselves. What army in Europe is currently bigger than the Ukrainian one? None. And that's our advantage, but a very expensive advantage at the cost of not only yourselves, you're providing the men, which is, of course, the greatest cost here, but it's a huge cost to then Europe, NATO as well. But who has a bigger military in Europe than Ukraine? Russia. Russia is still in Europe. It's Eurasian, but Moscow's still in Europe. So, okay, don't worry. Looking at what's happening at the front, looking at what's happening on international diplomacy, do you think the war could end this year? Is there a great chance of ending it this year than there was last year, for example? Trump really wants an end to the war. These are his claims, both public and private, and he's able to press and influence Russia. He's also able to further, way more than Russia, press and influence Ukraine also. I'm sure that Russia is afraid of the US, afraid of China, and afraid of a united Europe. Everyone is afraid of China and united Europe. Yes, that is what the greatest strength of Europe and NATO would be. That division, though, is growing and growing. Link back to what I said in the beginning about maybe people should look inwards rather than fucking outwards. Well, why is there division? Russia knows and has experience in this matter, and without the Ukrainian army, Europe unfortunately has no chance against Russia today. Putin knows this and talks about it in his circle. Therefore, Ukraine does not defend itself. He will quickly move on. This is a fact. I'm absolutely convinced of this. I don't think Zelensky is convinced of this. If Europe has no chance against Russia, then why is Russia at 20% of occupation of an ill-equipped, shortage of men, lower population, poor and corrupt country? This doesn't stand up. This is why it is informational, in my opinion. And I'll discuss this with anyone. I've already, the amount of bloggers and officials and stuff I've reached out to talk to me about shit like this. No one's doing it for me. We in Poland, like Ukraine, of course, this is Polish interviewers, understand Russia. We understand the threat it is. And we understood it before 14 and even more so today. So in what have you learned about Russia? What should we learn about this as well? I think the West does not understand one simple thing. The Nordic countries understand this, and he lists them off. They don't want to recognize one truth about the Russians. They will go further. And I think that this is the most important mistake. Again, none of the messaging from the pro-Russian side or the Kremlin Putin side has shown this, that they have imperialistic goals beyond here. It hasn't shown that, but nor have they shown militarily that they're going to have the capability to do this. Remember, it was the same that we were told that without of missiles, no tanks, no nothing. And if that is true, if they are going to go further, if they have the industrial capacity, the economic capacity, the missile capacity to do this, maybe a ceasefire should be seen to as soon as possible to remain anything. Okay? Because if you know the Russians will go further, then you know you have to counteract and introduce further sanctions. Why not strengthen Ukraine as much as possible? Increase production at home for your armed forces. That, of course, benefits then because more can go across to Ukraine. So this is, of course, an informational to get more. But in this, well, then why don't you drop your mobilisation age down to 25, back down to 18 from 25, and let the US, who is saying if you send us guys, we will train and arm them. Why is this not? That's something you can control the controllables. Also, these thousands of Russian missiles will simply fly to each of these European countries. So again, we haven't seen, though, Russia be able to launch thousands at once of missiles and completely cut off these grids either. Yet you're saying these are going to go against NATO, EU countries, and it will be successful and basically walk over the top. They'll go forward and shoot. It'll be like us today with a serious challenge. European politicians say they know Putin will not go to Germany or France. He will not necessarily go to them. Is enough to stand on the border and terrorise every day with attacks on energy or internet. So if he's firing missiles in every day into Europe, you know where missiles are going to be going? Petersburg, Moscow, Vladivostok. Again, they're going to be Bonnie Blued from every direction. This is why, Zelensky, if you believe this, then you would be like, well, we don't even bother about wanting to be in NATO, because if NATO is not going to be able to stand up to it, then why are you wanting to be in it? I think Zelensky's attitude towards some leaders at the moment, attitude towards some of this information stuff, is actually having a net negative effect on his popularity in Ukraine and with people believing or not, and is having a net negative effect actually overall. I would not be surprised if we saw Zelensky replaced with Zaluzhny at some point. You know what will show us this? Is if democratic elections are held in Ukraine at some point. Polls in Ukrainian society itself show the desire to end the war quickly, even at high cost. It's growing. Is time working against you? And this is what we see in the polls. More and more people want to end the war because of what is happening, because their children are the ones who could be at the bloody front line. So it's hard to say. I don't think that a long war works in favour of any side, ours or Russia. Now, in my opinion, protracted attritional war works in the favour of the side who can absorb and replace the largest losses and who can rely on internal domestic industrial capacity as well. And this attritional grinding forward, the longer it goes, if you can replace and absorb those losses, it will reduce the fighting after if you remain to occupy areas. So in my opinion, the way Russia is fighting, and where Ukraine is reliant on international democratic countries that can change leadership, it is in Russia's favour to have this go on if their economy can sustain this. Again, listen to the interview down below, because that talks about can Russia's economy can it not sustain war effort. Unfortunately, we have losses, and for me, that's the most painful. The Russians definitely have losses. They don't think about people, but of course they think about money. Sanctions work, so the war is definitely not in their favour. The sanctions have not had the effect we had hoped that they would in the beginning. The war at the moment is, in my opinion, objectively in Russia's favour. From the areas moving to the front line, the administration coming in saying we need an end to this war, and I believe seeing how people are seeing this war and going, why is this still going? How can we bring an end to this, and not taking into account then hopes and feelings and borders going, no, we just need to stop the bloody death. I think the problem's going to become, if the deal for Ukraine is worse, and I think likely will be worse than what was offered back in the beginning of 2022 to mid-2022, if it is worse than that, how will the public react, and how will you stop a mass exodus of people as well? Especially, imagine if I was here fighting and I'd survived until 2025 and this was over, and Lily, and if I had children, had moved out into Europe somewhere and set themselves up over 3 years. What's stopping me if that's lifted, getting fucking off and catching up with Lil? Anyway, legends. A lot we went over today. I think that is everything. This is where I missed something important. You have a great day. Have a fantastic Friday afternoon. Get yourself a beer, get yourself a chicken palm, and go for your life. Anyway, I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.